Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another installment in the Sydney Railroad build. If you're watching last time, you will have seen the railroad largely complete. There's still a few little bits and pieces to take care of. I think there was about 18 things on my punch-out list. Some of them were electrical in nature and there was nothing to see. But this video will document all the visible miscellaneous tasks that I had to do to finish up the project. So without further ado, let's just head out to the workshop and get that done. Last week I got the railroad to the point where it almost looks like it's ready to go. For the benefit of newer viewers, I don't have the contract to build the scenery or structures. That will be done by the client. It is a project for his retirement. I still have a few things to take care of. I made a list over the weekend. There was 18 items on the list. I checked 2 of them off yesterday. The first task for this morning is to cut the formers for the upper level backdrop. Now if we go back to the railroad, around the outside of the room, the backdrop will just be built in situ by attaching furring strips to the walls and then gluing the masonite to that. The only backdrop I'm doing is down the middle of the peninsula, and there I'm not doing that completely either because the ceiling is fairly low and we want to take the backdrop all the way to it, and that'll be a lot easier to build in situ than to try to finagle it into place when the railroad is installed. So all I'm doing is cutting the formers for all the complicated curves to make it a lot easier for the client to build later. That's what I'm working on at the moment. I have one of each marked out on this sheet of plywood. I'm not sure how well the lines are showing up on the camera. Looking through the viewfinder, I can barely see them. I've already started cutting out the one. I started by plunge cutting the inside with the skill saw, and now I'm filling in all the curved areas with the jigsaw. With anything like this, I find it easier to cut the holes out of the center first and then cut the outside. It reduces the weight of the full sheet of plywood while still giving me an easy way of holding the shape while I'm cutting it. And I'm just going to get back to work alternating with the skill saw and jigsaw until I've got these cut, and then once I've confirmed that they are correct, I will draw around them again to make another pair. Well, one of the formers is now cut out completely. The other one is still attached along the straight edge. And now that the whole sheet is a lot lighter to deal with, I'm going to set up the table saw and make this last cut. I forgot to mention earlier, when marking them out, I started by plotting everything accurately on my CAD program, working out key dimensions. Most of the corners I drew around my formers. This teardrop shape at the end, I made a trammel for it. And then the sharp curves at the end, I just drew around a paint can. It doesn't really matter what radius that is. And I elected to make everything 2 inches wide. That's enough to give plenty of stiffness while still making them light and easy to handle. It's also the width of my straight edge and my curved formers, making it easy just to draw along both sides at the same time. That is the first pair of formers cut and used as templates so I can draw around them to make the other pair. So now I'm just going to get those out of the way and repeat the cutting process for the second set. Well, that is all 4 of the formers cut. The final step is to join them together, and then I'm going to belt sand the edges so that they match. There shouldn't be much in the way of imperfection, but I want to get it nice and smooth. It makes it a lot easier to attach the backdrop later on. So I'm just going to put a few 1 1/4 inch screws in, get the belt sander out, and within a few minutes I will be done with that task. Well, I've now belt sanded the edges and I have them positioned approximately where they go. Ultimately they all need to be jacked up to give clearance for the tracks underneath them. So the bottom one will go up about 3 inches and the top one will be close to the ceiling. And they'll be positioned with spaces between them, and then masonite can be wrapped around the outside to form the backdrop. That's all I'm going to do to those. So now I can just check that off my list and get on with the next task. Well, the next task on my list was to install temporary risers under the two long bridges. So there's this one across the harbour short line and the river, and there's another one right in the far corner of the room near the engine terminal. And although there is no tendency for the plywood to sag at the moment, it might be years before the client gets to build those bridges permanently, and that's plenty of time for it to sag. So it's worth putting a temporary support in to prevent that happening. That went really quickly. I only had to cut one block of wood. This one I happened to find one that was already exactly the right size. All right, that's done. Let's see what's next on the list. Well, after I last spoke to you yesterday, I did work on a couple more small projects. One of them is a missing piece of benchwork that goes in the middle of the peninsula and supports the end of one of the spurs. Here it is. I had it left gluing overnight, so I couldn't install it, but I've now finished it this morning. The next thing I'm going to do is install it finally, and then I can lay the track on it. Well, there is that piece installed with the track on it. That is now done. There doesn't need to be any feeder on that length of track because it's only additional capacity inside an industrial structure, and standard operating instructions don't allow locomotives to enter buildings in the first place. I'm not sure if the lighting's any good in here, but here is another little project that I worked on yesterday afternoon. There were some missing safety fences in the approaches to the reversing loop. Those are now installed, and I left everything clamped overnight. I elected to clamp it instead of staple it because it's probably a lot easier than dragging the compressor in here. Here is the last of the three projects that I worked on yesterday afternoon and didn't show you. It is the secondary dispatcher's table to go under the end of the harbour peninsula for when the owner is running trains by himself without a full crew and a dedicated dispatcher. At the moment, the side rails run long because ultimately they will wrap around the end of the cabinet and make it look a lot neater. I've got to sand this area where I joined it, get the glue squeeze out off. I can't get it completely finished because my wood filler went rock hard and I don't have acetone to thin it with. So I'm going to need to get some more next time I go to Lowe's. But I can get most of it done. Well, that is the mini dispatcher desk installed. I screwed it from the inside of the control cabinet. Even though that was more difficult, it meant I could put in bigger screws because I got a lot more wood that I can screw into instead of being limited to 3/4 of an inch. I can't quite finish that yet. As I mentioned earlier, I've got to go into Lowe's and get some more wood putty to fill the gaps. Well, the first task I checked off this morning was to enlarge this access opening to its final size. If you recall before, it was just a very small gap in the plywood, barely big enough to stand in. Now it's a much more reasonable size. And this access opening is going to be completely covered by a large warehouse. I think that is actually the last of the benchwork tasks. I've got a couple of things on the wiring to do and some cleanup, and I think that's about it. But I am going to go back and read my list. I'm checking things off as I do them, and last time I looked, at least half of it was done. Well, I was wrong earlier. That wasn't quite the last piece of benchwork to be done. It was the end of the scrap wharf where I cut it too short earlier. I had to add a piece in there. Now this piece may be bigger than it needs to be, but I want to give the customer plenty of options. It's a lot easier for him to trim it off than it is for him to have to find a new piece of plywood to extend it. I did take the precaution of marking where the screws are so that it's easy for him to find them and back them out if he does want to modify it. Some time ago I mentioned the ledger boards that support the railroad around the edge of the room. I said I'd make a video on how I do them. It's just two strips of plywood. One's 4 inches, the other I think is 2.5 or 2 3/4. It goes that way, screwed to the wall, and where I have long runs, I put a splice plate in, and it sticks about 6 inches over the end. And then here is the piece that matches it. And they go on the wall like that. This is the A piece. There's about 5 B pieces in the middle, and then there's a C piece on the end. Most of them are stacked up under the benchwork, under there, and they're all ready to go in the container with the railroad. I have a paper plan inside that tells you which piece goes where and how high up to make it. Well, here is that paper plan that shows me exactly where all the ledger boards go on the wall. As you can see, the 2 long walls are both the same, with an A piece at one end, a C at the other, and 5 Bs in the middle. The 2 ends are different. One of them has a single board labelled D, and the other end has an E, F and G. I think the F ledger board is actually identical to the Bs. I'm not sure if they are indeed interchangeable, so I lettered them differently just to be on the safe side. Well, that's all for this week. Hope you enjoyed the video, found it useful or interesting, or both. And I hope to see you back next week, where it will be time to dismantle the railroad in preparation to shipping it off to Australia. And I'm really hoping that I will see you back here for that video. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and bye for now.